Conservative MP Michael Cooper speaking to us earlier from Shanghai. He's among the Canadian delegation of MPs and one senator currently in China. The trip was booked long ago and was intended to foster business and people-to-people ties between the two countries, but that focus shifted when Canada followed a request from American authorities to arrest a Chinese telecom executive last month. Then China detained two Canadians. Was it a good idea to continue with the trip? Will pressure from Canadian parliamentarians have any tangible effect? Gordon Houlden is a former Canadian diplomat to China. He's now the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Professor Houlden joins me from Edmonton via FaceTime. Hi, Professor. Thanks for your time today. Nice to see you.
Thank you for reaching out.
Professor Houlden, the Canadian parliamentary delegation says it has raised the detention of Canadians Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig today with Chinese officials. What, if any, impact do you think this could have on resolving the larger issue?
I think the effect will be modest. That doesn't mean, in my view, that something that shouldn't be done. I think that the Chinese decision makers, officials at various levels, need to hear other than their own state version of events, which I fear will be the case. Otherwise, they'll only have heard what the Chinese state media and their own government briefings tell them. This is a big issue for Canadians, and I think it's appropriate for parliamentarians to express the broad spread view of their constituents, who Canada's unhappy about the unwanted detention of the two people. So I think it's a good thing to do it, but we need to be modest in our expectations of what will happen.
Do you think it was a good idea to do to go over on the trip in the first place? Former Canadian ambassador to China, David Mulroney, said on CBC Radio, or I believe it was radio, that he felt the trip should have been deferred based on the tone of relations so far, based basically on recent events. Do you think that the trip was a worthwhile one, or is a worthwhile one? I'm sorry.
I have great respect for David. I know him well. We've worked together in the past. I would respectfully disagree in this instance. I think that we need to have as many channels of communication open as possible. Of course, the responsibility lies primarily, as it must be, with the Global Affairs Canada and ultimately the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister. But I think that there is a role for the Chinese, and the Chinese, of course, is a very big government, to hear from a range of people. And parliamentarians have a role in foreign affairs. They represent quite directly the views of the constituents, and those views should be forcefully transmitted to their interlocutors in China.
What we've heard so far from members of the delegation is especially that people they've been speaking to in China are raising the idea of political interference. Why can't you just interfere and make sure that Huawei's CFO is released? How difficult is it to convince people in the Chinese government that the legal system works so differently here? How big of a job do you think that is?
It's immensely difficult. I'm sure there are some individuals who have, say, worked at Chinese embassies and consulates abroad in Western countries who understand it. The Chinese are intelligent, but their own system works in such a different manner. I can recall working on the case of Lai Changxing, a big league smuggler who took, I think, 10 or 11 years. In this case, we were trying to get him back to China. China wanted him. And I had the sense it was like talking to a wall. The idea that our Prime Minister couldn't call up the judge and have the judge follow his dictates. Chinese had trouble understanding that or even believing us.
So what is Canada's best course of action then? If it sort of all hinges on this case and they are not to be convinced that the system just doesn't work that way here, what happens next, I guess? What should happen next?
Well, this is where it is exceptionally difficult. We are enmeshed in an extradition process, a law that served us very well over the years in terms of getting criminals wanted in Canada back to us, shipping unwanted criminals back to the United States. If we disregard that on the basis of it's inconvenient for us, that does real damage to the legal fabric between the two countries. On the other hand, I see no easy mechanism to solve this case while Ms. Meng still remains in Canada. I hope I'm wrong in that regard. The fact that the two Canadians have not yet been charged is a positive thing. I think they may be simply waiting to see what happens in February and subsequently with the extradition process for Ms. Meng. There is no simple solution right now. We're faced with very unpalatable alternative choices.
If Ms. Meng is extradited to the United States, do you think that will have a salient effect on what's happening?
I think we would see, and of course I can't foresee the future, I'm guessing based on experience, that the extradition procedure would lead to another outburst from China. Precisely how they would seek to punish it isn't clear. Whether they detain someone else, whether they use an economic measure or not, I would think that they will not sit by. If she's extradited, they will make another means of, I'm guessing, of showing their displeasure. Once she's then done that, so she's in U.S. hands, if that is the course of action that is followed, I would think that it would then devolve to be largely a U.S.-China thing. They won't forget this, but I think they also do not necessarily want the relationship to be held hostage indefinitely to this.
You mentioned the idea of global affairs taking the lead. We have this parliamentary group that's there right now. At what point, I mean, I'm sure you've heard a lot of political discussion about who gets involved and when. Do you think that this is something for the Prime Minister to get involved in? Or from where you're sitting, does this look like a normal course of events so far?
Well, it's not a normal course of events. These are innocent Canadians who I think we have some confidence were arrested purely in retaliation to the extradition process being applied to this month. There is a tactical question at what, and this is always the case in negotiations, not just with China, but especially with China, at what point do you deploy your top guard? And that point may or may not yet have been reached. One of the challenges is, once you've done it, let's say, if the Twitter calls to doing tomorrow and demands a release, the Chinese don't do so. And I actually don't think they would. Then what happens? Then where do you go from there? You have to really be aware of a little bit of risk of retaliation and choose your timing. Those in government will have to make that determination. Certainly the Prime Minister sees this. At what point does he become directly, personally involved? There's a fairly complex answer to that, and it's not always crystal clear what is the best approach. Once you've done that, of course, there's no further escalation. He is the most senior law officer in Canada, the person with most senior responsibility for conduct of foreign affairs. Yes, he needs to be deployed, in my opinion. The precise timing, I really don't feel like second-guessing Global Affairs Canada, but yes, it will have to be done at some point.
And finally, before I let you go, Mr. Spavor and Mr. Kovrig have been detained now for nearly a month in China. We know that there has been consular access granted at least once for each man, but we really don't know under what circumstances or conditions they're being held, or even their own personal conditions. What can you tell us about what might be going on behind the scenes, given your experience in other cases? Obviously, not speaking specifically to this one.
Right. Well, we do know in other cases that these detentions often involve 24/7 light, as in it never goes dark. They are probably being held in solitary confinement, and they're most certainly being interrogated 2 or 3 times a day, every day. And that's a psychological pressure induced to Chinese place great pleasure and great prominence on confession, and that's probably what they're trying to extract from them. These are not good circumstances, and it speaks to the nature of the general charge of endangering China's state security. It brings into play a different set of players and of conditions than would be the case if, for example, they're accused of a relatively minor misdemeanor.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Houlden. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.